Chapter 27 of New Grub Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. New Grub Street by George Gissing. Chapter 27. The Lonely Man. Part 1. A touch of congestion in the right lung was a warning to Reardon that his half-year of insufficient food and general waste of strength would make the coming winter a hard time for him, worse probably than the last. Biffen, responding in person to the summons, found him in bed, waited upon by a gaunt, dry, sententious woman of 60, not the landlady, but a lodger who was glad to earn one meal a day by any means that offered. "It wouldn't be very nice to die here, would it?" said the sufferer, with a laugh, which was cut short by a cough. "One would like a comfortable room, at least. Why, I don't know. I dreamt last night that I was in a ship that had struck something and was going down, and it wasn't the thought of death that most disturbed me, but a horror of being plunged into the icy water. In fact, I have had just the same feeling on shipboard. I remember waking up midway between Corfu and Brindisi on that shabby tub of a Greek boat. We were rolling a good deal, and I heard a sort of alarmed rush and shouting up on deck. It was so warm and comfortable in the berth, and I thought with intolerable horror of the possibility of saucing into the black depths. "Don't talk, my boy," advised Biffen. "Let me read you the new chapter of Mr. Bailey. It may induce a refreshing slumber." Reardon was away from his duties for a week. He returned to them with a feeling of extreme shakiness, an indisposition to exert himself, and a complete disregard that the course of events were taking. It was fortunate that he had kept aside that small store of money designed for emergencies. He was able to draw on it now to pay his doctor and provide himself with better nourishment than usual. He purchased new boots, too, and some articles of warm clothing of which he stood in need, an alarming outlay. A change had come over him. He was no longer rendered miserable by thoughts of Amy, seldom, indeed, turned his mind to her at all. His secretaryship at Croydon was a haven within view. The income of £75, the other half to go to his wife, would support him luxuriously, and for anything beyond that he seemed to care little. Next Sunday he would go over to Croydon and see the institution. One evening of calm weather he made his way to Clipstone Street, and greeted his friends with more show of light-heartedness than he had been capable of for at least 2 years. "I have been as nearly as possible a happy man all to-day," he said, when his pipe was well lit. "Partly the sunshine, I suppose. There's no saying if the mood will last, but if it does all is well with me. I regret nothing and wish for nothing." "A morbid state of mind," was Biffen's opinion. "No doubt of that, but I am content to be indebted to morbidness. One must have a rest from misery somehow. Another kind of man would have taken to drinking. That has tempted me now and then, I assure you, but I couldn't afford it. Did you ever feel tempted to drink merely for the sake of forgetting trouble?" "Often enough. I have done it. I have deliberately spent a certain portion of the money that ought to have gone for food in the cheapest kind of strong liquor." "Ha! That's interesting. But it never got the force of a habit you had to break?" "No. Partly, I dare say, because I had the warning of poor Sikes before my eyes." "You never see that poor fellow?" "Never. He must be dead, I think. He would die either in the hospital or the workhouse." "Well," said Reardon, musing cheerfully, "I shall never become a drunkard. I haven't that diathesis, to use your expression. Doesn't it strike you that you and I are very respectable persons? We really have no vices. Put us on a social pedestal, and we should be shining lights of morality. I sometimes wonder at our inoffensiveness. Why don't we run amuck against law and order? Why, at the least, don't we become savage revolutionists, and harangue in Regent's Park of a Sunday?" "Because we are passive beings, and we're meant to enjoy life very quietly. As we can't enjoy, we just suffer quietly, that's all. By the by, I want to talk about a difficulty in one of the fragments of Euripides. Did you ever go through the fragments?" This made a diversion for half an hour. Then Reardon turned to his former line of thought. "As I was entering patients yesterday, there came up to the table a tall, good-looking, very quiet girl, poorly dressed, but as neat as could be. She gave me her name. Then I asked, 'Occupation?' She said at once, 'I'm unfortunate, sir.' I couldn't help looking up at her in surprise. I had taken it for granted she was a dressmaker or something of the kind, and, do you know, I never felt so strong an impulse to shake hands, to show sympathy, and even respect in some way. I should have liked to say, 'Why, I am unfortunate too.' Such a good, patient face she had." "I distrust such appearances," said Biffen, in his quality of realist. "Well, so do I as a rule, but in this case they were very convincing, and there was no need whatever for her to make such a declaration. She might just as well have said anything else. It's the merest form. I shall always hear her voice saying, 'I'm unfortunate, sir.' She made me feel what a mistake it was for me to marry such a girl as Amy. I ought to have looked about for some simple, kind-hearted work-girl. That was the kind of wife indicated for me by circumstances. If I had earned 100 a year she would have thought we were well-to-do. I should have been an authority to her on everything under the sun, and above it. No ambition would have unsettled her. We should have lived in a couple of poor rooms somewhere, and we should have loved each other." "What a shameless idealist you are," said Biffen, shaking his head. "Let me stretch the true issue of such a marriage. To begin with, the girl would have married you in firm persuasion that you were a gentleman in temporary difficulties, and that before long you would have plenty of money to dispose of. Disappointed in this hope, she would have grown sharp-tempered, querulous, selfish. All your endeavours to make her understand you would only have resulted in widening the impassable gulf. She would have misconstrued your every sentence, found food for suspicion in every harmless joke, tormented you with the vulgarest forms of jealousy. The effect upon your nature would have been degrading. In the end, you must have abandoned every effort to raise her to your own level, and either have sunk to hers or made a rupture. Who doesn't know the story of such attempts? I myself, 10 years ago, was on the point of committing such a folly, but, heaven be praised, an accident saved me." "You never told me that story." "And I don't care to now. I prefer to forget it." "Well, you can judge for yourself, but not for me. Of course I might have chosen the wrong girl, but I am supposing that I have been fortunate. In any case, there would have been a much better chance than in the marriage that I made." "Your marriage was sensible enough, and a few years hence you will be a happy man again." "You seriously think Amy will come back to me?" "Of course I do." "Upon my word, I don't know that I desire it." "Because you are in a strangely unhealthy state." "I rather think I regard the matter more sanely than ever yet. I am quite free from sexual bias. I can see that Amy was not my fit intellectual companion, and all emotion at the thought of her has gone from me. The word love is a weariness to me. If only our idiotic laws permitted us to break the legal bond, how glad both of us would be." "You are depressed and anemic. Get yourself in flesh and view things like a man of this world." "But don't you think it's the best thing that can happen to a man, if he outgrows passion?" "In certain circumstances, no doubt." "In all and any. The best moments of life are those when we contemplate beauty in the purely artistic spirit, objectively. I have had such moments in Greece and Italy, times when I was a free spirit, utterly remote from the temptations and harassings of sexual emotion. What we call love is mere turmoil. Who wouldn't release himself from it for ever, if the possibility offered?" "Oh, there is a good deal to be said for that, of course." Reardon's face was illumined with the glow of an exquisite memory. "Haven't I told you," he said, "of that marvellous sunset at Athens? I was on the Nix, had been rambling about there the whole afternoon. For I dare say a couple of hours I had noticed a growing rift of light in the clouds to the west. It looked as if the dull day might have a rich ending. That rift grew broader and brighter, the only bit of light in the sky. On Parnes there were white strips of ragged mist, hanging very low, the same on Hymettus, and even the peak of Lycabettus was just hidden. Of a sudden the sun's rays broke out. They showed themselves first in a strangely beautiful way, striking from behind the seaward hills through the pass that leads to Eleusis, and so gleaming on the nearer slopes of Aigaleos, making the clefts black and the rounded parts of the mountain wonderfully brilliant with golden colour. All the rest of the landscape, remember, was untouched with a ray of light. This lasted only a minute or two. Then the sun itself sank into the open patch of sky and shot glory in every direction. Broadening beams smote upwards over the dark clouds and made them lurid yellow. To the left of the sun, the gulf of Aegina was all golden mist, the islands floating in it vaguely. To the right, over black Salamis, lay delicate strips of pale blue, indescribably pale and delicate. "You remember it very clearly." "As if I saw it now. But wait. I turned eastward, and there to my astonishment was a magnificent rainbow, a perfect semicircle, stretching from the foot of Parnes to that of Hymettus, framing Athens and its hills, which grew brighter and brighter, the brightness for which there is no name among colours. Hymettus was of a soft misty warmth, something tending to purple, its ridges marked by exquisitely soft and indefinite shadows, the rainbow coming right down in front. The Acropolis simply glowed and blazed. As the sun descended, all these colours grew richer and warmer. For a moment the landscape was nearly crimson. Then suddenly the sun passed into the lower stratum of cloud, and the splendour died almost at once, except that there remained the northern half of the rainbow, which had become double. In the west the clouds were still glorious for a time. There were two shaped like great expanded wings, edged with refulgence. "Stop!" cried Biffen, "or I shall clutch you by the throat. I warned you before that I can't stand those reminiscences." "Live in hope. Scrape together £20 and go there, if you die of hunger afterwards." "I shall never have 20 shillings," was the despondent answer. "I feel sure you will sell Mr. Bailey." "It's kind of you to encourage me, but if Mr. Bailey is ever sold, I don't mind undertaking to eat my duplicates of the proofs." "But now, you remember what led me to that. What does a man care for any woman on earth when he is absorbed in contemplation of that kind?" "But it is only one of life's satisfactions." "I am only maintaining that it is the best, and infinitely preferable to sexual emotion. It leaves no doubt, no bitterness of any kind. Poverty can't rob me of those memories. I have lived in an ideal world that was not deceitful, a world which seems to me, when I recall it, beyond the human sphere, bathed in diviner light." It was 4 or 5 days after this that Reardon, on going to his work in City Road, found a note from Carter. It requested him to call at the main hospital at 11:30 the next morning. He supposed the appointment had something to do with his business at Croydon, whither he had been in the meantime. Some unfavourable news, perhaps. Any misfortune was likely. He answered the summons punctually, and on entering the general office was received by the clerk to wait in Mr. Carter's private room. The secretary had not yet arrived. His waiting lasted some 10 minutes. Then the door opened and admitted, not Carter, but Mrs. Edmund Yule. Reardon stood up in perturbation. He was anything but prepared, or disposed, for an interview with this lady. She came towards him, with hand extended and a countenance of suave friendliness. "I doubted whether you would see me if I let you know," she said. "Forgive me this bit of scheming, will you? I have something so very important to speak to you about." He said nothing, but kept a demeanour of courtesy. "I think you haven't heard from Amy?" Mrs. Yule asked. "Not since I saw her." "And you don't know what has come to pass?" "I have heard nothing." "I am come to see you quite on my own responsibility, quite. I took Mr. Carter into my confidence, but begged him not to let Mrs. Carter know, lest she should tell Amy. I think he will keep his promise. It seemed to me that it was really my duty to do whatever I could in these sad, sad circumstances." Reardon listened respectfully, but without sign of feeling. "I had better tell you at once that Amy's uncle at Wattleborough is dead, and that in his will he has bequeathed her £10,000. Mrs. Yule watched the effect of this. For a moment none was visible, but she saw at length that Reardon's lips trembled and his eyebrows twitched. "I am glad to hear of her good fortune," he said distantly, and in even tones. "You will feel, I am sure," continued his mother-in-law, "that this must put an end to your most unhappy differences." "How can it have that result?" "It puts you both in a very different position, does it not? But for your distressing circumstances, I am sure there would never have been such unpleasantness, never. Neither you nor Amy is the kind of person to take a pleasure in disagreement. Let me beg you to go and see her again. Everything is so different now. Amy has not the faintest idea that I have come to see you, and she mustn't on any account be told. For her worst fault is that sensitive pride of hers. And I'm sure she wouldn't be offended, Edwin, if I say that you have very much the same failing. Between two such sensitive people differences might last a lifetime, unless one could be persuaded to take the first step. Do be generous. A woman is privileged to be a little obstinate, it is always said. Overlook the fault and persuade her to let bygones be bygones. There was an involuntary affectedness in Mrs. Yule's speech which repelled Reardon. He could not even put faith in her assurance that Amy knew nothing of this intercession. In any case, it was extremely distasteful to him to discuss such matters with Mrs. Yule. "Under no circumstances could I do more than I have already done," he replied. "After what you have told me, it is impossible for me to go and see her unless she expressly invites me." "Oh, if only you would overcome this sensitiveness!" "It is not in my power to do so. My poverty, as you justly say, was the cause of our parting. But if Amy is no longer poor, that is very far from a reason why I should go to her as a suppliant for forgiveness." "But do consider the facts of the case, independently of feeling. I really think I don't go too far in saying that at least some provocation was given by you first of all. I'm so very, very far from wishing to say anything disagreeable. I am sure you feel that. But wasn't there some little ground for complaint on Amy's part? Wasn't there now?" Reardon was tortured with nervousness. He wished to be alone, to think over what had happened, and Mrs. Yule's urgent voice rasped on his ears. Its very smoothness made it worse. "There may have been ground for grief and concern," he answered, "but for complaint, no, I think not." "But I understand," the voice sounded rather irritable now, "that you positively reproached and upbraided her because she was reluctant to go and live in some very shocking place." "I may have lost my temper after Amy had shown, but I can't review our troubles in this way." "Am I to plead in vain?" "I regret very much that I can't possibly do as you wish. It is all between Amy and myself. Interference by other people cannot do any good." "I am sorry you should use such a word as interference," replied Mrs. Yule, bridling a little. "Very sorry indeed. I confess it didn't occur to me that my good will to you could be seen in that light." "Believe me, I didn't use the word offensively." "Then you refuse to take any step towards a restoration of good feeling?" "I am obliged to, and Amy would understand perfectly why I say so." His earnestness was so unmistakable that Mrs. Yule had no choice but to rise and bring the interview to an end. She commanded herself sufficiently to offer a regretful hand. "I can only say that my daughter is very, very unfortunate." Reardon lingered a little after her departure, then left the hospital and walked at a rapid pace in no particular direction. Chapter 27.